Hello, one and all, and welcome to the SuperShow podcast, episode number 201. That's right. We are back in action after hitting a pretty chunky milestone. And I don't know, I feel like I have to start this podcast by saying once again a huge shout out to Chris for coming through last week and celebrating episode 200 with us in style. But I also want to say a big thank you at the top of the show to everyone who tuned in, everyone who left a comment. I don't know if you have had a chance to look through yet, my co-star this evening, Mr. Alex Jones, but I thought it was great to see so many familiar faces and long-time listeners leaving really nice notes on that video.
It was great. It was nice to see everyone, jumping in the comments and enjoying Chris's guest appearance. I did give people false hope as we went live with this because I'd updated the number of this show to 200 because it was 199, and so some people were commenting saying, "Oh, does that mean Chris is going to be back because it's 200 again?" But I've updated the name now. It's now 201, not 200. There is no Chris, unfortunately.
It's like the last Mission Impossible film. We called it Part 1, thinking that's what we were going to go with. Then we decided we were going to change our mind and just get rid of the Part 1, and now it's just two separate episodes. But hopefully, Chris, that reference is going to be lost on so many people. I'm apologizing outright for all the people who aren't Cruise heads out there. But hopefully, Chris is back. Chris is like our Tom Cruise. And we hope that he's back in the future. We've always told him he's got an open door, and I don't know. I hope he enjoyed hanging out last week, and it would be nice to see him return to the fold, offering in his hot takes and what do we call them? Not
trash
hot takes,
opinions.
Trash opinions. Much catchier than shitty opinions. Jonesy, actually, before we get into the thick of this podcast, which I will remind the folks at home, in case they are feeling a little bit lost, is ostensibly about video games. I do just want to do something that it's not a hot take or a trash opinion, but it's perhaps my favourite segment of the show, which is the Alex Jones Anecdote Hour. Do you mind if we take a little segue into what has been going on in the past week when it comes to your endeavours in hardware manipulation? Because you put out a series of tweets in this past week that feed into a story that you've been sharing with the folks at home over the course of months now. The conclusion of which, like, Hercule Poirot, eat your heart out. Like, no one could have seen these twists coming. Can you just tell the story to the folks at home?
I can. I'll try and keep it brief for people that don't care. So going back about 6 months ago, or maybe not 6, maybe like 4 months ago, my PlayStation 5 disk drive stopped working, and to much pain in my household. It would, you could put a disc in, it would load the disc up, but it would just spin and spin and spin, and it wouldn't work. Nothing would happen. And it would say error reading disk. And I'd done a whole bunch of research onto this issue, and apparently it's very common. And it was like, it could be a lens issue, it could be a bunch of stuff. Anyway, I did the research because my PlayStation 5 was out of warranty, and I worked out it was like going to be 200 quid to send this to Sony to get them my disk drive fixed, which I was like, there's no way I'm doing that. I've got a lot of digital games as well, so I was just playing that. But the kids were... specifically my eldest was a bit annoyed because he wanted to play Sonic Frontiers. I know, but he's
hey, to each their own.
He's 7, so give him a break. But we had this on disc, and I'm like, well, I'm not buying the game again, so unfortunately can't play it. His other favourite game had gone missing as well at the same time, which was Pokemon Sword. And my wife took the house apart looking for it, couldn't find it anywhere. Got to the point where he'd asked for it for his birthday again, because he's got a newer Pokemon game. He's got Arceus, but he does not like it at all. So he's like, I want to play Sword. So yeah, anyway, so these two things in the back of my mind. Eventually, I find a YouTube video which is, this is how to take apart your PlayStation 5 disk drive, because I'm like, if it's just an issue of cleaning the laser, then I can do that, whatever. So I take the entire thing apart, deconstruct the disk drive, which is, it's not the trickiest, but it's not the easiest thing. Open it up, and lo and behold, there is Pokemon Sword sitting in the PlayStation 5 disk drive that my 5-year-old had obviously thought, well, I'm going to play Pokemon Sword on the PlayStation, and so shoved it into the disk slot.
Outrageous. It's so funny because we can all relate to it. Like, I think we all had that point. Well, maybe you grew up in a slightly different era, but maybe you had an equivalent to this. I must have put a PlayStation 2 disc in a DVD player at some point, just wondering what would happen. Because there's at least some cross compatibility there when it comes to the physical format of the media.
It makes sense.
But a cartridge in a disc drive, and like the PS5 disc drive, it's not a tray. Like, there's like a vacuum element there. Like, you have to put a cartridge in there with some gusto.
Oh, my 5-year-old is a tough little cookie when he wants to be. So I'm not surprised at all that he forced it in there with a little effort or issue. But then I did say to him afterwards, I said, I found Pokemon Sword. Do you want to know where it was? And he was like, where? I said, someone had shoved it in the PlayStation 5. He went, who did that? I said, you did that. Because I remember the day that it broke. So I remember the day it stopped working because he was trying to put something in, and I said, what are you doing? And he was like, and I said, don't touch the disc drive, I'll do it. Because he was 4 at the time. So I'm like, leave the disc drive alone. And then I put the disc in, and that's when the first time it wasn't working. So I know what had happened.
It blows my mind that even, again, I don't know what it's like to be 4 or 5 years old. I can't remember that back that far. But to put your favorite game into a PlayStation 5, to watch it go and not come out, and then just think, oh, I must have lost it somewhere. Like, just how?
No, see, the little one doesn't play Pokemon, so he didn't care.
Oh, so it's the 7-year-old.
I was joking about that he was trying to play it on the plate. He was just stuffing stuff in places, so he doesn't care. But it was my eldest one's favorite game.
That, yeah,
exactly.
Okay.
So he didn't want to get in trouble. That was the thing. So that's why he didn't admit it. But I had such a like a successful manning day where I took the PlayStation 5 apart, found Pokemon Sword, put everything back together, plugged it in, and it worked. And I was like, I've successfully manned today.
Yeah. That's the great part about this, is that it has a happy end, especially given how much Sony wanted to charge you for replacing the disc drive of that PS5. And we were sat here a couple of weeks ago talking about waiting for a potential PS5 Pro and reinvesting in a new piece of hardware outright. The fact that you manned it all single-handedly, pretty impressive.
And now I can watch Oppenheimer in 4K on the disc that I've got.
There you go. You're officially, that is the most disc boy thing you could have possibly said. And you said it. So I also have to implore anyone out there who's halfway interested to go and look at Jonesy's Twitter at SuperShow Jonesy. You won't get the pleasure that we did of being able to follow the antics in real time. But like that image, the picture that you've taken of like this this naked PlayStation 5 disc drive with a Switch cartridge just perched atop it should be hung up somewhere. Like, you've got Marilyn Monroe's dress being caught in the wind. You've got the Tank Man at Tiananmen Square, and then you've got this when it comes to like the most famous photographs in the history of history.
I do have a confession to make because
this is when you tell me it's staged.
Okay, because interestingly, you sent me a message immediately after that I'd put it up, and you said, "Is that picture legit?" Which I was like,
"Yeah."
Because I think I'd sent you a picture of all of the parts of my PlayStation 5 strewn about the table, and you were like, "What on earth is happening?" And then I think you said it was that image, like actually legit of the cartridge. You said, and was that pic with the Switch cartridge legit? And I thought, Jamie's questioning the authenticity of my picture. Well, I will admit, let me admit something. What actually happened was, I opened it up, I saw the cartridge, picked it up, thinking like, "What is that?" Because I didn't immediately think it would be like the disc drive, so when I turned it over, like, because when you're taking it apart, you have to like take it out and detach certain cables, and I heard something rattle, so I was like, oh, maybe this is going to be an easy fix, like maybe something's just unhooked inside, and so I picked the disc up, and then I was immediately like, oh, I've got to take a picture of this because it was like so crazy. So I placed it back exactly where I'd picked it up from. And that was the picture. But then when you said to me, "Is that picture legit?" I did question for a second. I was like, "It is," but it wasn't 100% legit. But I'm going to say, it was legit. It was legit in that sense.
I feel secure in the knowledge that you, to the best of your abilities, put it back in the position from which you picked it up. And I feel like if that part of it is intact, then my kind of like mental image of how historic this whole day and this moment was is also intact. So I'm happy. I'm satisfied. I think when I asked if it was legit, I was picturing you like picking up something, rattling it around, a Switch cartridge, falling it on the floor, and you kind of perching it there because it made sense for the photograph because you could get both in the frame.
See, I was thinking that maybe you were suggesting that I had orchestrated the whole thing, and actually it was like a penny or something, and I was like, oh, do people do that? I was like, then I got me thinking, I bet people do that. I bet people do fake stuff. You see it all the time, don't you, on social media? People like making up stuff. But no, and now it all works. Yeah. It works fantastically, and it's all great.
I was never questioning the legitimacy of the story. I think
right.
Being friends with both you and Chris and seeing your interactions with your children has taught me that when it comes to children under like the age of 8, anything is possible. Anything's on the table. Just if it sounds crazy enough that they would do it, they probably did it.
Yes, they probably did.
They probably did. But anyway, enough about children and fixing disk drives. We got a fucking video game podcast to record. And I've got to be honest with you, Jonesy. I feel a little bit mean saying this up front, but I think it's fair that we give people a little bit of a heads up. Bit of a Debbie Downer of an episode this week.
Yeah.
Sometimes, in a kind of a literal sense, in that the news is in itself a little bit sad, a little bit raw, and in other places, just because we are trying to decipher the words and the meanings and the machinations of various CEOs and directors that just make zero sense to us. And that's just sad in a different kind of way. We're going to be talking about EA. We're going to be talking about some of the layoffs there, but we're also going to be talking about the effect that has on their portfolio of upcoming titles, especially as it relates to various licenses. Star Wars games fans especially will want to listen out for that one. We're also going to be talking a little bit about Warner Brothers and some of the bizarre and potentially even backwards lessons they have learned from the last 12 to 18 months of releases that they've gone through, and then also a bit of sad news and a bit of a loss when it comes to the emulator space, as we're going to be touching a little bit on the battle. Well, the extremely short-lived battle, the battle that never even became a battle between Nintendo and an emulator called Yuzu. But all of that is still to come. I also just want to say that if you are at any point keen to get involved in any of these discussions and you want to let us know your thoughts, then you can do so by getting involved in the comment section. If you're watching on YouTube, you can reach out on social media. The handle is @SuperShowPod. You might be watching us live on YouTube right now. If you are, hello. I'm sure Jones has got half an hour in the chat, so we'll come to you folks in a minute. And also, as always, this podcast is available in audio formats on major podcasting platforms. You can head over to Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, and get your ears filled with video games. Jonesy, do we have any riders on the storm today?
We do. I want to give a shout out to some people in chat. I'm talking to Magni, El Loco Soto, Y Callum, are all there keeping up with us as we go out live to the YouTube. So thank you so much for joining us live, guys, and for chatting away. Like I said, apologies for the lack of Chris, despite my misnaming of this episode as to 200.
Tut, Jonesy. See, now after, again, you've revealed that your viral sensation on Twitter was slightly doctored. Now I'm just starting to think that you're intentionally manipulating everything you do online to try and lure more people into your madame's web of lies.
Yeah, I may well be. I don't even have kids, and I'm not married, and I don't have a PlayStation 5. So, believe what you will.
I'm just unraveling.
I'm just very good with ChatGPT and Photoshop image generation.
Yeah, if anyone's noticed, and you're a fresh new swing in the style of the thumbnails, you can attribute that to Jonesy's ongoing fascination with AI, which now means in the half an hour to an hour that Jonesy and I spend on Discord chatting as we prep for the podcast is also filled entirely with conversations about AI. And I feel like if I could encapsulate the entire conversation we had earlier, Jonesy, without boring people and without straying too far from video games, at one point you were talking about AI's capacity in the future to identify the identity of Jack the Ripper. So,
yeah.
One day we should just hit and the Zodiac Killer, of course. One day we should just record all of that stuff and put it up for patrons, because I can't be the only person that has to be saddled with this information.
I think that we just ask it to write 10 episodes of Known Murderer for us. We say we want scripts, or not the scripts, but we want the data and the information the key points for 10 episodes of Known Murderer, and then we could just go ham on Known Murderer for the
I
patrons.
like how you said not the script, because there's some part of you that wants to maintain some kind of artistic or creative integrity. But we all know that as soon as our bosses or managers are looking the other way, we're going, actually, write the script as well while you're at it. I'll tweak it on the. It's like using Google Translate when you can't be bothered.
Like
to do
we're
Spanish homework.
scripted. Imagine if this was scripted. Like more likely is I'll get the AI to do all my real work, and then I'll be chatting away with you on the internet about known murderers.
Yeah, if this was scripted, then well, we're not only are we unbelievably good or unbelievably bad actors, depending on your perspective,
Ooh.
but also we need to put out a job advertisement for a new writers' room, because they've been letting us down lately.
Indeed, they have. Yeah.
Also let down, Jonesy, are the employees of Electronic Arts, and they have been let down by their seniors because in a story that will sound horribly familiar to anyone who's consumed any gaming news over the past 18 months, even gaming news in the past week, there are more layoffs to discuss. Lots happened since we recorded episode 200, especially, and even more so since we went live for 199. Obviously, there were some situations at PlayStation where everyone was affected over there, from Naughty Dog to Guerrilla and so on and so forth. Some projects caught in the crossfire over there. Anyone that was looking forward to that Twisted Metal reboot, I hope you weren't holding your breath, because you will soon find yourself passing out as a result of that. But we're going to focus on EA, who have announced that they are restructuring, and it's going to affect a wide range of projects and teams. 5% of the workforce, Jonesy, 670 people. Obviously, a pretty significant number. We've had numbers at various companies creep into the low thousands, but at the end of the day, I don't know if that tracker, that website that was tracking the number of layoffs in the game industry in a given calendar year, is still going, but they're probably struggling to keep up at this point. It is. When does it end? When does it end? To ask you the impossible question, what does it take for this? Is this becoming fashionable now? Are companies getting pressured by shareholders to make cuts because other companies are making cuts? Is this making cuts in lieu of profits? Because that's the other weird thing in the backdrop of all of this is EA aren't suffering or struggling. None of the companies, or very few of the companies that are making these cuts, having trouble with their bottom line. They're all generating decent amounts of profits. But is this sales have dropped and cuts are another way of generating, a backwards way of generating revenue? Is this they did it so we should be doing it too?
He's got
all of the above.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's all of the above. And if you read into a lot of it, it effectively comes down to they did massive overhiring around COVID and that era, and they're still attempting to revert back to more manageable sizes and team sizes, etc. Off the back of that. But I always come back to the number of bad decisions from high ups at gaming companies. I think lead to a decent number of these layoffs. It's not just there was too many people and the company would have been fine, but they need to then get rid of some bodies to realign, restructure. No, half the time it's we made some horrendous decisions. And we'll talk about some what I would say not great decisions from Warner Brothers later on, which in the future could well lead to more cuts because someone made some bad decisions. And you just think there's a lot of fantastic people in the games industry. We were talking before the pod about saying, what horrible time I was saying to graduate university, and you were saying not. But also, what horrible time to just be in the games industry, and for people to be facing these kind of cuts. But to work hard and to get into that position and to have a skill set, and then the whole industry just starts squeezing. It's horrendous. And a lot of the time, like you said, if it is to maintain profit margins, it's got to be even worse. At least if your company was effectively about to fall on its knees with spending or whatever, or really struggling, it would make, I suppose you could say, all right, I guess that's why. But when it's someone like EA who don't seem to be in that position, maybe they're preempting it. Maybe they think they could be an issue down the line. But
honestly, don't get me wrong, when a CEO goes public, they have to save face and they have to speak positively. But when you look at some of the comments that Andrew Wilson, the EA CEO, that's 5 letters back to back, baby, not easy, that he made around these job cuts, some of the and it's all the usual buzzwords we're hearing, but yeah, it's not a company on its last legs. It's not a measure that is. So it's not we're saving 670 jobs we're cutting these jobs to save other jobs, or so that the company continues to exist and for another year or anything like that. It's it's optimizing global real estate footprints.
Which is closing. I love when you have to like translate these. So that means closing offices because offices are expensive. So restructuring reducing staff. That's restructuring. That's firing people. And then being more efficient with real estate is closing offices because now they have fewer staff. Like it's all
and the net result, Jonesy, a greater focus that will allow them to drive creativity, accelerate innovation, and double down on our biggest opportunities. Because of course, the less people you have working on the same amount or slightly fewer projects, the more focused things are, right?
Of course you are, because your vision is not as broad because you don't have the people to be as broad. My favorite one is efficient, and I've talked to people I work with before about this one, which is efficiencies. We're finding efficiencies, which usually means you take the same number of people, right? Sorry, you take fewer people and try and have them work on the same amount of work, which is like now, and you're like, well, how does that work? Because we can't do the same number. If you've got 10 people doing the job that 15 people used to do, you're like, well, how's that possible? I only have the same number of hours in the day. And they're like, yeah, but we're being more efficient. So now you can do more work. And you're like, oh, right. So basically you pay me the same. You've got 2/3 the workforce you used to have, and then you can extract more profit. And they're like, yeah, that's what we want to do. So efficiencies, restructuring, efficiencies, focusing, all these ridiculous words for,
when the net result is, again, in this case, just shy of 700 people losing their jobs. And naturally, as to echo the same sentiment we've shared always when these stories emerge, we share our deepest sympathies with those affected, and we hope that everyone who can bounces back from this as quickly as possible. And I mean, we were talking about before about like if the net result of this is that more and more people, whether they were looking at getting into the games industry or in the games industry looking to get out, if more and more people are put off by the games industry as a result of its volatility, then ultimately you have to say, a lot of these major studios and companies are bringing it upon themselves. And when there is that inevitable upturn, and in a year or two's time, all the graphs are trending upwards again, and the EAs and the Microsofts and the Sonys and PlayStations of the world go out and try and start hiring, and that they find that the sentiment out there around people who are, maybe have gone to the independent side of the industry and don't want to go back to the corporate side or have left the industry altogether is actually, no, we can't be bothered to be your playthings for another couple of years until you realize that all those projects you kicked off instead of financing were actually ill-conceived and you're cancelling them all or sunsetting them all and moving away from them, and we're on the chopping block again. We're not doing it. Like, there's only so many times a group of people can get fucked around before a good number of them say, yeah, I'm done. Like, I can go work for an IT company and I'll be A-okay.
I think as well, we've talked about it a lot, and so I won't go on about it, but I think the where we're at as well with layoffs in the gaming industry, it seems extra bad because we seem to be at the tipping point, like a new paradigm inside the gaming industry whereby AI is going to take a lot of jobs as well. But I don't think we've not seen that yet. Like, we've not seen the proper implementation of that. We've seen it in some capacity, but I don't think we've seen it in big companies. Like, they're not talking about actually replacing entire roles or entire rooms of people with AI, but you've got to expect that in the next couple of years that will start to happen. And so off the back of all these layoffs, it's every chance that then there are more layoffs because of technology. And it's just, I don't know. It seems like a rough time, a very rough time to be in the games industry, which isn't good for people who play games. It isn't good for people who want to work on games. But there we go.
No. And exactly, like, again, it sometimes feels a little bit weird when you're pivoting from the people who make games and you're talking about actual jobs and livelihoods to talking about the games themselves, which are ultimately just products for us to consume. But inevitably, there are games that are affected by this in one way or another, and they are considered news as well. So should we roll through, Jonesy, how things are affected as far as EA's portfolio goes?
Yeah, definitely.
Because there is a bit of a shake-up first and foremost when it comes to their plans with regards to Star Wars, which, I'll be honest, I thought we're always a little bit kind of not over ambitious, but a little bit much to begin with, because EA, I think prior to this, had as many as 3 Star Wars games in development. At least one of those has been cancelled. And that was Respawn's first-person shooter set in the Star Wars universe, which, ironically, given the timing of how this is going down, I think literally maybe a week or 2 tops prior to this news breaking, was subject to a big report from Insider Gaming, who outlined what Respawn's plans for the game were, and it was described as an FPS with that wasn't a direct adaptation of the Mandalorian TV show, but had Mandalorian elements that would see you play as a. Can you be a Mandalorian, or is there the Mandalorian? I've not seen the show.
You can be a Mandalorian. Yeah, Mandalorian is someone who follows who wears the the Mandalorian style armor and doesn't take their helmet off. They're almost like religious sect, aren't they? They follow
is it like a samurai kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly. But they don't reveal their faces. They always have their helmets on. They try and get, is it the Bespar? I can't remember the type of armor they wear. But they're bounty hunters, and they're hired, and they protect people, and they're hired for all different jobs. But yeah, you're right. It's kind of like a samurai sect, but they are the Mandalorians. But he is the Mandalorian.
He is the Mandalorian. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Well, from what I understand, this game then would have seen you presumably play as a Mandalorian, and it would have tapped into, from what I understand, some of the bounty hunter associations with that group. It would have utilized things. I remember them as like Jango Fett stuff rather than the Mandalorian stuff, because I know those movies slightly better than the TV stuff. But like the jetpack, for example, would have been used for a lot of like sort of horizontal dashes and double jumps that we've seen in a lot of first-person shooters with a heavy emphasis on traversal in recent years. People might think back to like Advanced Warfare and stuff like that in the Call of Duty series as a frame of reference for how that might work. Talk of maybe some Doom-like elements, like potentially having to, or being rewarded for getting close to enemies and doing close-up style, not executions, but takedowns and finishes. And yeah, also talk about like a bounty hunter style structure where you might begin in a home base and kind of choose a loadout and go out to certain planets or to go and pursue certain targets that wouldn't necessarily be in open or even semi-open environments, but would be slightly more linear. And I'll be honest, Jonesy, when you talk about something like that, it does sound like, or have glimpses of, that kind of meme that you always get of like, oh, it's this blank game that people have always wanted, the Star Wars game that people always want. Yeah. I mean, I know there's the Star Wars Jedi series, and that is ticking a lot of boxes for people, I understand it. But there is bits of this that I'm sure struck a chord for Star Wars fans. When you tell them that it's a Respawn developed FPS as well, and they start applying some of their, knowledge or familiarity with Titanfall 2 potentially to what this game could have been, it looks like you're staring down the barrel at an absolute slam dunk of a video game, and then it is ripped from us before we even can lay eyes on it. There are a lot of conversations to be had around whether or not we should feel any kind of like remorse or cancelled games when we don't know anything about them. The example that popped into my head that I'll share with you now is that if someone had told you, if a year or two after Warner Brothers and Rocksteady had announced the Suicide Squad game,
I was just thinking that. I love that you use that example.
Yeah, we'd have all been pretty bummed out. Would have been, oh my god, guys, it's Rocksteady, great characters. They could have done something really interesting, and you've taken that from us before we even got it. We never know whether or not why a game was cancelled, and whether or not it was even good. But if we were just to look at this, because we are surface level fucking weirdo idiots who talk on a podcast about video games, just look at the fundamentals of what they were hoping to make. At least it sounded like it could have been something pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. When you think of like Titanfall 2 and you think of first-person shooter and you think Respawn, Mandalorian, you put it all together in your head and it's like a 9.5 out of 10 amazing game. Oh my goodness, this is fantastic. Loved it. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It could have been a Suicide Squad level job. It could have been, there's upteen times when companies have missed the mark. Like just think of like Redfall, for example. Like that, that would... If you'd have cancelled a game like Redfall mid-development, we absolutely all would have said, "Oh, that game would have been out. That would have been insane. I can't believe they've cancelled that." So, but then we're also going to talk about the fact that there's talk about a new project being worked on by Respawn, which is set in the Titanfall universe, which has
Yeah.
apparently been, and which is even stranger because we've just had this game cancelled and then now they're apparently working on something else, which is kind of weird.
Right, like it was the idea that Respawn were working on, like, continuing to work on Apex Legends, working on the next Star Wars Jedi game, the third Star Wars Jedi game, which we have had confirmed has not been cancelled, working on this FPS, and then also working on another FPS in the Titanfall
My
universe.
goodness.
Like, the idea that all of those games were happening at once at Respawn seems a little bit much.
I've just figured it out. Lightning has just struck my brain. I've had an epiphany.
Share the lightning, baby.
The Star Wars Mandalorian first-person shooter Respawn game is not dead at all.
Okay.
But EA, as part of their saving money, have said that one thing they're going to do is focus on franchises they already own, the IPs they already own, to reduce their licensing costs. What if that game is simply being reskinned to be a first-person shooter in the Titanfall universe, but the game is exactly as the game was, it's just going to be reskinned because they already own the Titanfall IP, and then they can save the cost of the Mandalorian licensing?
I think it's possible if they weren't outlined as two different projects that had two different directors.
Now they're one. Now they're joined. Now they're all together, saving money.
Don't get me wrong. When it comes to a studio at Respawn making FPSs, I'm sure there is a bunch of shared DNA. I'm sure the Apex team are talking to the Star Wars team, who are talking to the unannounced Titanfall universe team. But yeah, the Star Wars FPS game, the Mandalorian-esque thing, was being helmed by Peter Hirschman, who used to work at LucasArts and was the co-creator of Medal of Honor, and also worked on the original Battlefront games. So some history there with Star Wars that made a certain amount of sense. However, this Titanfall game, this mystery Titanfall game, the reason why it's even more confusing is it's being directed by Steve Fukuda, who was the game director on Titanfall and Titanfall 2. So the director of Titanfall and Titanfall 2 is making a new game set in the Titanfall universe that's not Titanfall 3. Can I share the quote with you? Because
Yeah.
I think this all originated from Jeff Grubb, who is, a quote-unquote insider. So take all of this with a pinch of salt. But the quote from him, which I think encapsulates all the confusion I think we're all feeling. This game, as it stands today, as far as I understand, is a quote-unquote Titanfall game. It's in the Titanfall universe. But everyone I talk to keeps saying, well, it's not. Don't get in your mind that it's Titanfall 3, like a game with online multiplayer and a single-player campaign. I'm like, well, wait, what? Then what is this game? I still don't know. But it feels like if you're going to go all in on your own IP, just expand that into being Titanfall 3. Figure out a way to make that happen. And then I'm reminded that they were working on Titanfall 3, essentially with Titanfall Legends, which is going to be a part of Apex Legends. And they pulled the rug from underneath that, and blah, blah, blah. So the person who revealed this information to the world, or decided to go public with the conversations he'd had with people who are clearly in the know about what Respawn are working on, he himself seems extremely confused about what this is.
I'm telling you, it's a reskin Mandalorian game to become a Titanfall universe first-person shooter.
Even if it is, that's not a bad conspiracy theory. That's because what it represents, and I know that if Chris was here, this is the thing that he'd be clinging onto for dear life, is it's a glimmer of hope for the long-suffering Titanfall fans of the world who have wanted since fucking 2017, was it? A follow-up to one of the greatest single-player campaigns in a first-person shooter ever.
Yes, and I think I can see why. I'm with him. I would have loved a follow-up to Titanfall 2. I think we're going to have to wait for if this game does come out, at least this unnamed Titanfall universe game. I'm sure some clever hacker coder person will be able to get into the code itself, and they'll be able to find references to Grogu, Mandalorians, anything Star Wars related, and then we'll be able to blow this conspiracy wide open.
Yeah, and then we'll be able to feed all that information into your advanced AI model, and it will be able to tell us not only who Jack the Ripper really was, but whether the game would actually be any good.
Yes, before anyone's even played it.
Before anyone's even played it. But yes, I guess that's the fascinating thing in all of this is, whilst no one, probably even at Respawn, people even at Respawn are slightly confused about what their FPS future looks like, I hope we will get one game out of this. And to reiterate again, I think when it comes to when it comes to cancelled games and games where the people who are working on a particular project lose their jobs, that's the real cost, is those lost jobs and the people who have to go out and seek further opportunities. I think, like, for as much as we are going to talk plenty in this podcast about people in high level positions making absolutely brain dead decisions, there's still an element here where we have to acknowledge that sometimes games are cancelled for a reason. If bad games can make it all the way to release, then what do you have to be to like? I love the idea for the sake of the internet, because they want to get riled up and they want to get their pitchforks out. I love the idea that EA like willfully cut an amazing looking potential 9.7 out of 10 Star Wars FPS game just because they wanted to piss some people off and cut some jobs. But like, they don't, things like that don't happen. Games are cancelled for all kinds of reasons, and them not shaping up well enough, quickly enough, is amongst them. Then potentially, it could be that it was really good, but it was also really ambitious, and it was like, yeah, this is incredible, but we don't have 7 years and $200 million, so we have to, like, and that's sad. I get it, but
it'll make it worse if Outlaws is bad. That'll make it even worse, because then we'll all be like, oh, but remember the Respawn Mandalorian game that could have been. That'll make it even worse, but that remains to be seen.
But Jonesy, that's not the end of it though, because like we said, the Respawn's other Star Wars project, the next Star Wars Jedi game, is obviously still in development. Plus, Bit Reactor, who are the team that were working on that Star Wars strategy game in the Star Wars universe with Respawn, they've confirmed that their game remains unaffected. So we are still due a number of Star Wars games, both from EA and Ubisoft, and probably other places too.
I think that sort of makes your point for you, as you just said. When you consider a game like the one that Bit Reactor are making, it's a strategy game. It's from guys who made XCOM, who made Civ. Like that, you know, these are guys who know strategy games, and you've got to imagine that it's more of a known quantity to develop a game like that, and with a Star Wars skin, a strategy game that looks like a Star Wars game, and it be successful than taking a punt on a first-person shooter Star Wars game based around bounties that you don't really know what it is. You've got to imagine that it's more financially viable to take more of a risk on a known quantity. Rather than let's just have a bit of a punt with a Star Wars game made by Respawn, which as you said, like reality is they probably wouldn't have cancelled a game that was really promising and going to be cheap and fantastic. Like there would have been some reasons why they decided to move away from it.
Yeah, for sure. And another reason, while we're on the topic, and something that I'm sure is going to come up an awful lot as other studios and major companies continue to outline their plans for coming years, is licensing. Licensing is extremely expensive, and oftentimes all you are doing is making IP that other companies hold the rights to even more lucrative and even more valuable. I've heard a lot of references, a lot of people sort of saying to themselves and others in recent weeks and months how I'm sure that EA were actually, in many respects, very glad that that deal with FIFA, for example, didn't come to fruition, because it's just money down the drain that they have immediately proved they didn't need. And so EA have actually clarified in and amongst all of this, and particularly pertinent when we're talking about a Titanfall game going on while a Star Wars game passes by, EA have plans to move away from future licensed IP towards its owned IP, sports, and massive online communities. Makes more sense, like if you've already established those IPs or those series, to continue to reinvest in them and not spend money on other, like making other people's names even bigger. That being said, the Black Panther and Iron Man games they were working on have also not been cancelled. So EA still deep in the pocket of Disney, again, perhaps having to pay for decisions they made years ago at this point. But it is fascinating to actively have to come out and say, here's our plan for the future, and how it actively contradicts what we're doing in the next handful of years.
Yeah, like as you said, like, contractual obligation is definitely a bitch. But I think EA are probably thinking that right now. I maybe I'm being too mean, but I don't think either the Black Panther or the Iron Man games are going to be up to much. I just because it's already tough. Like Wolverine from Insomniac, I'm super excited that could be really good, but also at the same time I'm like, there's every chance that it struggles because it's just hard to do a new thing. Like we talk about Rocksteady and Suicide Squad, it's hard to even adapt something you're really good at. And so when you and you know, Marvel's Avengers, I don't like to bring it up, but we've not seen many good implementations of Marvel characters. And we have quite a few of them coming through in the next number of years, and they are worrying to me across the board. Like obviously Batman's done it DC from the DC side, Spider-Man's done it from the Marvel side, but any other character seems to just like struggle seriously. So I find it bizarre that they're carrying on with Black Panther and Iron Man. Maybe that's sunk cost and that they're just carrying on because they're at a certain point. Maybe it's that the deals with Marvel are better than the deals that they've got with Star Wars, and the fact that they're earlier in the process, you know, they're not going to lose as much money. It's fascinating. I would love to be a fly on the wall in some of these meetings to know what was going on.
Totally. Especially because it's like you look at the conversation between licensed IP and owned IP, but then there are also probably massive conversations about like the quality of the product. You could look at a video game like Anthem. I don't know what the budget for Anthem was, but you look at what that did to BioWare's reputation, to EA's reputation, and how they essentially flunked on creating a piece. It's recognizable IP, sure, but for many of the wrong reasons. And like, what if they're looking at that Iron Man game and saying, well, if this is another Anthem, let's make sure that it has the words Iron Man on the box, so it's Iron Man that takes the hit. Not like, it's just fascinating that you want your name to be attached to good products, and well, I guess by extension, not indirectly, other people's names to be attached to bad ones. But there must be some fascinating conversations going on there where they're looking at Iron Man and being like, what if this was Anthem 2? And it reviewed really well and resurrected the reputation of Anthem, and all of a sudden we actually had a really strong piece of owned IP with phenomenal brand potential and all these kind of things. I don't know. Do you know what makes it even more muddy, Jonesy?
Go on.
And I apologise if there's just EA news after EA news. Battlefield, still a fairly popular series, but I think it's fair to say coming off the back of one of its weaker and least popular entries. Also controversial about the most recent Battlefield was that it didn't have any single-player component. Obviously, a lot of people have very fond memories of the campaigns of Battlefields 3 and 4 in particular. Hardline less so. It's worth noting that in amongst all of this, EA closed a studio called Ridgeline Games, who were only formed in 2021, I think late 2021, so call it 2 years and some change. But they were working on a single-player Battlefield game to come out in the future. So they had a studio, and admittedly, that studio was created from scratch. They were staffing up. Staffing up is hard. We don't know how successfully they'd staffed up. We don't know how, that project could have not got off the ground whatsoever, and nothing of any real value was actually being cancelled. But that was the studio that was formed or headed up by Marcus Leto, who was the co-creator of Halo. There were a lot of things going for that studio, and to hear them being handed the reins to, the Battlefield series, and again, we haven't even talked about the Bad Company games when it comes to memorable single-player experiences from that franchise. That's another thing that strikes me as a potential, great win in the owned IP region that EA are looking to double down on in the future, that they have now backed away from. And again, I don't want to do one thing and say another. I don't want to be a hypocrite. I've already talked about how we can't cry over spilt milk, and sometimes games are cancelled for good reasons. But deciphering what is going on at EA at the moment is fascinating. That's all I'll say.
It is, and
they're getting to the point where they're making Ubisoft's situation look somewhat less haphazard.
Yes, I guess there's so much behind the scenes that we don't know about, and that's where it all comes down to. Really, is all this stuff we have no idea, no way of knowing. As for the Iron Man being another Anthem, I don't really see a way that an Iron Man game is good. I'm always down to the point flying in games is terrible, and any game that does away with flying because it's terrible is just going to be ridiculous if you have a character like Iron Man. The
flying in Anthem was the best. Do I say the best bit?
It was good. The flying was good.
Bits?
The flying was good, but that means you have to end up with the level design has to then hem you in. So you have to have those giant gorges and the canyons, and then you have to have the whole landing process. I think it just causes too many problems, and that for me is any Iron Man game is going to have the same problems. So I don't see how they get. So yeah, I think it ends up being like Anthem, or you end up putting him in a city like Manhattan, and you've got to have him flying around between buildings, which I think is just kind of bad. And I don't know. I'd love to know the way that all the conversations and how they go down and how they decide what to make and what to not. And I do think it's I'd love to know, but we won't. But as you're right, I think it does start to make EA seem a bit Ubisofty, which I'm sure they won't appreciate. People saying that, but
they won't appreciate it at all. But I mean, like, hey, that's. Well, you know what? We shan't speak too soon. Like you said, a lot of speculation, a lot of not knowing what's going on behind the scenes. But again, the top line is still the big takeaway, which is that another company making cuts to their workforce. That sucks. Fortunately, though, Jonesy, we haven't had to make any cuts to our workforce, and that is because we have the love and support from our patrons. Individuals who have gone over to patreon.com/SuperShow and through sheer generosity alone have seen fit to back us. They've pledged at any number of tiers and earned any number of awards, all to help keep this podcast going. They could have, for example, pledged from just $2 a month and got access to our Discord, which has now become the kind of the rallying point for anyone who wants to play Helldivers, myself and Jonesy included. The crew keeps growing, so shout out to everyone we've played with so far. But there's Patreon exclusive videos, there's Patreon exclusive podcasts. There's all kinds of shit. So once again, a huge shout out to everyone, especially as we embark on another, dare I say, 100 episodes. Big shout out to everyone who is involved in keeping us going through the Patreon. I believe, Jonesy, I'm right in saying that there are some names on screen right now? Question mark. He's nodding. I got the nod. There you are. See, do you see your name? It might be there. But I would also like to give some personal shout outs to Aaron Cameron, Athletic Gravy, Brimstone, Icenaut Rock Salt, Jesper Camdal Nielsen, and Pastors Guild. And finally, we have the big dogs, the head honchos, the members of the board, the people who are determining what to do with their workforce, which, again, it's just me and Jonesy, so please be nice. Brett Z, aka Shell Shock, Geometric Potter, Hacksaw Book Read, Manuel Guerrero, and Peaswad. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
I realise when I add a number
Definitely
of so's,
appreciate
it sounds like I'm being sarcastic. I'm not being sarcastic. Jonesy, how do you feel about flying by the seat of your pants?
I love it.
Good, because that's, I think, what I'm going to do, because that's what podcasting is all about. We have set a bit of a precedent in recent months based on community feedback, let's call it, which is a nice way of saying one person asked if we would do it, and then we said yes, of reminding people which hot new video games we're releasing each coming month. And it has occurred to me now, Jonesy, that we are, at the time of recording and live streaming, at the 5th of March, and we have not yet told people what to expect from this month.
We have not. I suddenly realised that about 15 minutes ago. I was like, we haven't done the games that are coming out this month. You know that I like to give a little recap mid-month as well, so I'm all about this. But
the mid-month recap does my fucking head in. Here's all the games that are coming out in the next 2 weeks. 2 weeks after we told you all the games that are coming out in the next 4 weeks. But I've got a Wikipedia page up here called 2024 in video games, and I'm looking at the January to March and the April to June sections. I mean, I could just read out the names of some games.
Yeah, go for it. Let's hear what's coming up.
It's not. I'm going to cheat. First of all, it's not a March game, but I do just want to give a shout out to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which came out on the 29th of February. Just snuck in there at the end.
That's not a real day, so I think that counts.
But that's part of why I want to give them props. For taking advantage of the leap year and saying, fuck it, we're only going to get one chance to release on the 29th. They did it. They got a 92, I think, at the time of recording on a Metacritic, which kind of was more impressive than I thought it would be. Not that I ever thought it would be bad, but it was always going to be interesting to see just how good a job they did of following up what was I'm not going to say a polarizing predecessor in the form of remake, but there were definitely people out there, and maybe this is me just, putting that out there because I felt like I was one of them who didn't know how to feel about that game. Sure enough, it seems like sentiment on Rebirth is a lot more one way and a lot more positive. Huge Metacritic score for them, potentially a big success on the hands of Square Enix and PlayStation fans around the world. Are you picking it up, Jonesy?
No.
Oh, then maybe I could interest you today, of all days, in games like the Outlast trials. Have you ever felt like Outlast is so scary that the only way you could possibly make your way through it is by doing it with friends? Well, now you can. It's been in early access for some time, I believe, but it is now been fully released.
Again, yeah, too scary for me. I can't outlast, so probably not.
Yep. One game that is significantly less scary than it was 4 years ago when it was absolutely filled to the brim with glitches and we had to play it on stream having been given a copy by the publisher and pretend we weren't seeing said glitches. WWE's back and better than ever. 2K24, and yes, significantly less glitchy than it was sort of circa 2K20. Many people will be happy to hear that. People less happy to hear, though, Jonesy, that on the 18th of March, Hi-Fi Rush comes to the PlayStation 5.
That's cool.
Now, does that pique your interest?
That definitely does. Like I've already got Hi-Fi Rush, so it's not something I'm gonna have to play it on PlayStation. I might play it on PlayStation, but it's more the idea of I think that's a really cool game, cool idea. I love rhythm games of that type, and so yeah, I think it's cool that it's going to be coming to PlayStation for PlayStation players to get their hands on it.
Yeah, I know I don't need to buy it because I'm still a Game Pass subscriber, so there's absolutely no reason whatsoever that I should get Hi-Fi Rush on the PS5, and I still kind of want to. You're going to be swinging for the fences, not just against robotic enemies, though, Jonesy, but also against baseballs the day after, on the 19th, because MLB The Show 24 is going to be released, and then the day after that, 3 video games back to back to back. Horror edgelords, aka people who don't like Resident Evil or Silent Hill, can rejoice because Alone in the Dark is finally coming back. That one that has that chick from Killing Eve and David Harbour in it. That THQ Nordic have been that are going to be publishing is out on the 20th. Although if you want to save your money on the 20th of March, I would forgive you because March 22nd is the closest we've come to the video game release day apocalypse so far, Jonesy. Dragon's Dogma 2, Princess Peach Showtime, Rise of the Ronin, and the Legend. I don't know what the Legend of Legacy HD remastered is. Fuck that game. Those other 3 though. Pretty big deal, especially, Rise of the Ronin and Dragon's Dogma 2 coming out on the same fucking day.
Yeah.
Still blows my mind. But there we go.
What are you, out of those 3, what are you going for? If you're gonna go for one?
Princess Peach isn't even taking a back seat in that battle. She's in the boot with duct tape over her mouth. It's Dragon's Dogma 2 versus Rise of the Ronin. I
don't believe you. I think that day I'm going to talk to you, and you're going to get Princess Peach Showtime. Definitely.
I didn't even get Mario Wonder on day 1.
Oh, all right, fair enough.
That's insulting.
Because I don't think you'd get Dragon's Dogma. Rise of the Ronin. Yeah, I could see you getting Rise of the Ronin, but hey. We'll see.
Rise of the Ronin might be edging at the moment just because I didn't play the original Dragon's Dogma. I know it's a cult hit, but I've got no affection for it whatsoever. That said, I do suffer from FOMO massively. And if Dragon's Dogma 2 is like a fucking hit and Rise of the Ronin misses in some capacity, then it could easily swing the other way. Are you in the market for either of them?
If I'm surprised and the reviews of Rise of the Ronin kind of give it less of a Bloodborne vibe and more of a Ghost of Tsushima kind of vibe, which I don't think is going to happen at all based on what we've seen, then I could be in the market for Rise of the Ronin. I don't think I'm looking to go get Dragon's Dogma. Similar reasons to you, didn't play the first one. And also, I'm quite excited about Hello Games globe-trotting dragony adventure.
Ooh, right, yeah.
Which I have no idea when it comes out, but I think that's more my angle when it comes to riding dragons and flying high.
I feel that those two games could not be more different, other than the fact that at one point a character may well be on top of a dragon. But sure.
Oh yeah, that's all I'm basing it on. Like I've not played either. I know they both have dragons.
I only have room for one where for one
game
where an individual mounts a giant creature in. I played Shadow of the Colossus and I got my fill for years. I don't need to see anyone else grapple on the back of a giant creature.
Precisely.
That is fair enough, Jonesy. I will give a quick shout out to a game that Wikipedia have not put on their page yet, but I can tell because I'm diligent and I do my research. One game that is coming out this month that I know some people are looking forward to: Star Wars Battlefront Classic Collection, the pairing of the original OG Battlefront games from the PS2. That's coming out on the 14th of March, and then we round out the month.
I might have to get that.
I mean, if you've got nostalgia for those games, that's an easy win.
They're
That was
so
one of the
good.
ones where like my chat at work doesn't pop off for many video game related things, externally speaking, as weird as that sounds. But that was one of those ones where the next day after that direct, I think it was announced in, someone was like, "Hey, fucking Battlefront Collection, whatever it's called."
Yeah, that is cool.
Yeah, slightly less cool. South Park Snow Day. I still really don't know that I understand entirely what that game is, or why they're pivoting in that direction. But we'll find out on March 26th. And that more or less rounds out the month, Jamesy.
Yeah, it's not the best month, but there's definitely stuff in there for people who are into those games who are going to absolutely love it. Just like I said, unfortunately, not a lot for me. But yeah, we'll see. Except for like the Battlefront collection, which I genuinely was like, when I heard about that, I was like, oh wow, okay. I wonder what. Oh yeah, I really could do with getting my teeth back into those. Battlefront 2 was absolutely phenomenal. Obviously, it's going to look dated at this point.
Yes,
but we'll see.
I think that could be part of the charm. Like,
agreed.
Going back to the Battlefront games for them to look, there are good-looking They made good-looking Battlefront games, and they weren't as good as the bad.
They were not as good. Yeah, they were cool. They were very cool, but they were not as good.
Yeah. One game I do just want to say as well that I'm going to keep an eye on, just because I'm fascinated by its journey to market, for want of a better way of putting it. I don't know if it rings any bells for you, Jonesy, but it's called Open Roads. It was originally announced way back in the Game Awards in 2020.
Does not ring a bell.
Developed by Fulbright and published by Annapurna Interactive. Fulbright being the kind of walking simulator narrative dev team behind Gone Home, which some people think kind of like helped birth that subgenre, and then Tacoma, the one that was set on the space station. You might recognize the trailer and the art style. Yeah. So this was announced, and like at the time, Fulbright were kind of, again, like it was a fairly big deal. Fulbright, as I said, like Tacoma received a mixed reaction, but Gone Home was a pretty, whether you liked it or not, was a pretty significant title for the time. So there were a lot of eyes on it, and obviously Annapurna, especially when you go back to 2020, were one of those publishers that kind of everyone kept an eye on basically everything they put out. Unfortunately, in 2021, the founder of Fulbright was outed for alleged toxic behavior. He then left the team, had left the team by last year, and announced that was no longer working on Open Roads. Now the game is now credited to just Open Roads team rather than Fulbright. A bit like when Russian athletes are allowed to perform but not as Russian. It's like we just did Open Roads from the Open Roads team. And it's actually like got an okay cast. Kerry Russell plays the mother in it, and Caitlin Dever, who will be playing Abby in the next season of The Last of Us, plays the daughter. And I believe the story revolves around their relationship, their mother-daughter dynamic. That game is supposedly, after many delays, coming out on March 28th, as a way of rounding out the month. So, I don't know. I just wanted to throw that out there as something that I'm keeping an eye on. I don't know, like, every now and then something still scratches the same itch as like Firewatch did for me, and I'm like, oh, I wonder if that's going to be one of those games I can sit down and play in one evening and have a really great time with, and then, I don't know.
No, I'm totally with you on that. Like, I had is it Under the Waves did that for me. Was
Right,
that
yes,
kind of
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Scratches that kind of narrative, intriguing kind of itch, but it's from a different, just from like a not a first person shooter, third person action game kind of thing, but more of a just a damn cool story, and you wanna know what's going on with these characters. But yeah, I'm with you.
Absolutely. Yeah. But then that said, Jonesy, there are plenty of shooters out there that do still do a damn fine job of scratching itches, especially in the name of democracy. I've got a feeling like you've been playing one of them.
Yes, I've played far too much Helldivers 2
Good.
in the past weeks. Yeah, fantastic game. Still loving it. Enjoy every time I get to jump on with some of the patrons, some of the people in Discord, or yourself, indeed. Even though I did have a bit of a shocker the other day, we were playing and I had a bit of a couple of bad games, but then pulled it back as I played some public games yesterday. I think I played a few. Had a good time. Leveled up again. As you told me, I need to stop leveling up because I've been playing that game too much. But I've
I might be catching up now. I haven't hit level 20 yet, which I'm constantly reminded of by the lack of railgun in my inventory, but I'm getting there.
I was seeing some of the memes though about like people saying if you don't use a breaker and if you don't use like certain builds, then you should get kicked. Like automatically, you should kick someone from your squad if they're not. And I hate that kind of thing. Like I like having fun. Like I like enjoying myself and being a bit ridiculous. And yeah, we were just chatting very briefly before the show about there's been some tweets from the dev team Arrowhead talking about introduction of mechs which are coming soon and potentially like giant robot enemies and things that are going to be introduced. So excited to see where that game's going to go. I won't bore people with talking about it ad nauseum because we've talked about it a lot already, but just in some ways I feel bad about liking Helldivers as much as I do, because every time I run up to like a vault which is underground and there are two buttons and it's exactly the same layout with the same little crashed forklift truck just outside of it, and it's exactly the same, and you see a bunch of stuff which you do every time you launch an ICBM. It's basically exactly the same little setup, no matter what planet it's on. I feel a little bad that I don't give them more jip about the fact that they're, Starfield got a lot of shit for planets being samey, but at the same time, it's just this doesn't matter.
Again, yeah, I think when you're able to put emphasis on other parts of your other parts of your game and other parts of the interactions that people are having with it, then you understand or accept. I think every person who plays game is willing to understand or accept that some components of the games they play will be made up of like reused assets or reused ideas or reused mechanics or whatever it is. But it's just I think it's the extent to which emphasis is placed on those ideas and how good the rest of the game is at distracting people from the parts that are maybe weaker than some of its, than its cohorts on an industry-wide level. Like, very few people are talking about Helldivers when it comes to its visual fidelity. Very few people are talking about it when it comes to its there's decent enemy and environmental variety, but how many hours do you have to play before you've seen most of what that game has to offer? Even its unlock systems and like they're all very engaging, and you always feel incentivized to keep pushing for the next thing. But you take a look at that menu, you can build a pretty solid mental image of, for as many different versions of Eagles this and Barrage that's there are. You look at those animations or those videos that play when you're looking at them in the upgrade menu. You make a mental note of what they do, and you're like, yeah, that's a different kind of explosion. But that it doesn't make you any less determined to work or progress towards that point. And I think that's just because they've nailed that loop. Like many people are talking about Helldivers in terms of the quality of the fundamentals, and that really is the takeaway there. They knew exactly what game they wanted to make. They made exactly that kind of game. They made something that appeals to more people than I expected it to. Like even more every day, literally, I say every day, literally as of today, more and more people from my Warzone crew are buying Helldivers too.
Right.
Because clips are going viral and they're asking what this is. And the reason clips are going viral is because everything's tuned, as we've talked in the past, to go viral, to create sensational and memorable moments. Yes. Like it's just a really intelligently and thoughtfully designed game that constantly reinforces the central mechanics and ideas at the very heart of what it's all about. Democracy and fucking smushing bugs and automatons.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's interesting as well is that the way that they've kind of put the game out there is there are still things that you'll be playing with someone. You know, I'm almost level 20, and there are things that someone will say to me that, like, we were playing the other day, and someone will say, "Oh, did you know this actually works like this?" And I'm like, "Oh, no, I didn't. That's okay. That's cool." And then because it's just not become part, and then that adds in that you add that into part of the game, and then the game just sort of grows from there. And I quite like the way that they've not tried to sort of, you know, they've not tried to be like, oh, this is how you're supposed to play the game. This is what you're supposed to do. It's like, here's a planet, go mental. And that's what you do.
Exactly. Here's a planet. Here's a playground. Here are the concepts or the mechanics or the ideas that we're going to instill in you as a player in terms of how aware we're making you of what you're coming up against and the ways you have or the means you have of dealing with what you're coming up against. And it's also just like a keep it simple kind of idea. And like, yes, like at a certain point, you see a question mark on the horizon or on the compass, you know off by heart what things it could be, what rewards you could get. But like, it's the same reason that so many games like keep us on that hamster wheel and we don't want to get off. Like, it does tap into some of those slightly more innate, perhaps even slightly more worrying, you know, human desires about what inspires us to keep moving forward. It reminds me of when, like, you know, circa 2008, was it? You know, a hot new video game comes out, really expensive, hot new video game, the biggest game of the year, massive cinematic campaign set in World War II, globe-trotting adventure, expansive multiplayer with loads of levels to go up and ranks to unlock, and you know, tons of weapons and kill streaks and all this stuff. And yet you have your first conversation with someone about that game after it came out, and they go, "Have you done the thing at the end where you kill zombies over and over again for 300 hours?" Who cares? Like, sometimes like there is a fucking, what's it called? Like, not a rat brain, but like there's a thing in all
lizard brain
that is drawn to the simple but fun.
Do you want to know something? You know, like, they've never reached the highs of that zombie mode either.
One room, like, you think about how some people would disagree. There are, I get that, but like, there are entire like YouTube channels devoted to the zombies modes in certain Call of Duty games, and they still thrive to this day. And I don't necessarily get it, but yeah, I think it taps into some of what Helldivers taps into. That it's that lizard brain thing. I don't care if you've got a globe-trotting cinematic campaign that's, you know, 3 times as long and has 5 times as enemy variety, 7 times as many different weapons, and I'm not stuck in one room putting planks up on the wall every 30 seconds. Like, I want to do this. I want to get to a round that I've never got before. I want to open up a part of this room or this bunker that I've never accessed before.
I tell you, but don't you think that's jumpers for goalposts? It's kids on a school field putting their jumpers down as goalposts, and then kicking a football and doing it every single day for years. And it's like, it doesn't change. It's still a field with that, but every game is different. That's what I love about games that manage to tap into that. It's like Rocket League or something like that. It's super simple, but every game is different. Every game is. Playing with this, it's the people you're playing with. It's that either camaraderie or it's the, you know, playing against other people, and it builds
exactly.
And you build it yourself. You get the fun yourself, and I think Helldivers has nailed it.
Oh yeah, and that's why every conversation you have with someone about Helldivers 2, how many the sentences start with "me and my friends, we had this amazing moment when," or where. You can't have that when you're discussing a linear, you know, narrative-driven single-player experience. Everyone has the same experiences, and it might be a phenomenal experience, but it can't be unique to you in the same way games that Helldivers 2 can.
No.
And you know what? I know what else has a lot in common with Helldivers 2 in terms of the draw and the feedback loop and the cycle and how unique it can be to you and how many different variations you can get on it, despite the theme being remarkably singular and linear on paper.
No.
What? It's a game that I lost somehow more time to this week than I did Helldivers, which is I'm going to call it Balatro. There are some American people on podcasts around the world calling it Balatro, but I can't bring myself to say that.
Balatro. Yeah, I don't know.
What would you have said? You can see it written in front of you.
I would have probably said Balatro, but you said Balatro, and I'm like, yeah, I think Balatro is better.
I like Balatro. Balatro came out a couple of weeks ago, and it is a poker roguelike. Uh, and
Right.
that's basically literally all you need to know. You are dealt a hand, and you build various poker hands using the cards you have at your disposal. So let's say you're dealt 8 cards. You could, by discarding cards and keeping the ones you were and keeping others, you then might build. You might have a flush, you might have a straight, you might have a two pair, and so on and so forth. And you have a certain number of hands that you can play, and a certain number of cards or times that you can discard cards. And every single time you are scored for the hand that you're played, the score being influenced in the early stages by like the value of the card on the face of the card, and the multiplier, which is determined by the complexity of the hand that you play. I.e., you're going to get a lot more points for playing a flush than if you play a high card or a pair. So, you poker logic still applies. And if you get over a certain score, then you have cleared that blind. And the game is made up initially of 8 antes, and each ante is made up of a small blind, a big blind, and a boss blind, which basically like beat this score, beat this bigger score, beat this bigger score with a kind of a variable on it that makes it a boss sort of stage. But of course, it's a roguelike, and so it's not just about playing the same card. There are all kinds of ways that the formula is mixed up. There are jokers that add all kinds of variations that kind of add multipliers, or you might get a joker that turns all hearts into diamonds and all spades into clubs. So you actually end up, your 52 cards are now split technically into only 2 suits, so it becomes way easier to play flushes. So then you're like, oh no, I'm doing a flush build, so then you might go after other cards that enhance your ability to play flushes, or the amount of points or multipliers you get for playing flushes. And you can also enhance your deck, like so you might be able to turn a card into a glass card, which means it gets a 2 times score multiplier every time it's played, but also has a risk of shattering or breaking. Or you might be able to turn your card into a steel card, which makes it a multiplier, but only if you don't play it, if you have it in your hand and don't actually play it. And when I tell you it gets deep, like, I have just been just as addicted to playing Balatro as I have been to watching YouTube videos of it, because people are getting scores. Like when you play your first hand, I think you need like 300 points or something like that as a frame of reference. There are people who have playing hands and getting scores so big that the game just goes to blank, like 3 point something something times e to the power of whatever, like, because it can't display the number of zeros in question, like trillions, I think, in some certain cases. I honestly, like, anyone that, and I will say up front, you don't need to be a poker expert. It helps to have some familiarity with the type of hands one can play in poker and to identify them, but you don't have to be able to identify them quickly. You're also not actually playing poker against anyone else. You're just always playing the best hand that you think you can play relative to either what you've got or the kind of run you're going on. But I think it reminds me of that game Solitarica, which on mobile, which did the same for solitaire as this is doing for poker, albeit in a far more restrained and less fantasy-driven kind of direction. It kind of takes all the fundamentals and all the numbers going up that we love about roguelikes, and that thing of, I've unlocked a different type of deck, or I've unlocked a different, a new type of joker, or I've unlocked new tarot cards, and a lot of these terms won't mean much to people who haven't played the game, but a lot of that same, carrot dangling in front of you that we're used to from roguelikes, and yet taking something as sort of familiar and universal as the fundamentals of poker and combining the two, absolute stroke of genius, unbelievably addictive, and thoroughly recommend that everyone give it a look and go in with an open mind. That's all I'll say. So I know it might sound incredibly boring, but it is the single most addictive game that I've played this calendar year.
Interesting. Okay. I like a bit of poker. Maybe I'll have to give Balatro a go.
I genuinely, thoroughly recommend it. Like, yeah, and it looks a bit intimidating at first. That's the other thing I'll say. Like, I remember thinking before I buy it, I'll watch someone else playing it for the very first time.
Yep.
I think actually the YouTuber Ludwig, I ended up watching his stream, so like going through the tutorial almost with him and thinking, even I'm not 100% sure what's going on here, but you'll pick it up faster than you think you will, and you'll get addicted even faster than that. So that's all I'll say.
Cool.
The other nice thing about it, Jonesy, is that it's not a free-to-play or a live service game. Because I am adamant that I don't think that those should constitute a large part of our video gaming future, although some people out there beg to differ. And in particular, I'm talking about some of the fine folks who reside over Warner Brothers, who have reiterated some of their plans to actually increase focus, would you believe it, on free-to-play and live service games. In spite of the fact that that might fly in the face of what the last 12 to 18 months of their own releases might tell you. So this all comes from the Morgan Stanley conference, which is a room or many rooms that I'm sure is just filled with the most nice and salt of the earth people on planet Earth. One of which, JB Perrett, who is the company's CEO of Global Streaming and Games, has been making some pretty interesting statements. Can I give you some quotes?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay. The majority of our business revolves around four main forms of IP in games, which are all billion-dollar-plus businesses themselves, in which he's referring to Mortal Kombat, Game of Thrones, the DC universe, and Harry Potter. Obviously the
Thrones.
Yeah, that's a bit of a weird one, because obviously there hasn't been a notable or large like AAA Game of Thrones video game project. But from what I understand, between smaller things like the Telltale games and also some work in the mobile markets,
Right.
Game of Thrones has been successful as a video game IP in its own right. It's worth noting, though, Jonesy, that Game of Thrones aside and Mortal Kombat aside for the moment, two noteworthy titles there. Harry Potter, which of course had a spin-off last year in the form of Hogwarts Legacy, which ended up officially being 2023's best-selling game. And then this year we've already had Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, which, quote, failed to meet the company's expectations. Again, like I reiterate, single-player, narrative-driven, not live service, Hogwarts Legacy was 2023's biggest-selling game. Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, which was live serviced up the fucking arse, has failed to meet the company's expectations. Can I hit you with another quote?
Yeah.
The challenge we've had is that our business historically has not been very AAA console based, and so, as you know, that's a great business when you have a hit like Harry Potter. I agree, by the way, JB. That's me interjecting, by the way, not JB integrating with himself. It makes the year look amazing. And then when you don't have a release, or unfortunately, we also have disappointments, we just released Suicide Squad this quarter, which was not as strong, it just makes it very volatile. Again, this is where it starts to go off the rails. JB suggesting that the release of games like Suicide Squad makes the AAA console-based release world look volatile.
Yes.
But then we get on to comments
agreed,
like
JB.
this one. Yes. The company, but even still, in spite of all of that, the company is focused on transforming our biggest franchises from largely console and PC based with 3-4 year release schedules to include more always-on gameplay through live services, multi-platform, and free-to-play expansions, with the goal to have more players spending more time on more platforms. And this is do you want to know what really takes the cake, Jonesy?
Yeah.
I know this is just a lot of quotes. I'm leaning on JB a lot right here, but he won't mind. That's why he went to the Morgan Stanley fucking conference. Rather than just launching a kind of one-and-done console games, how do we develop a game around, for example, Hogwarts Legacy or Harry Potter, that is a live service where people can come today and live and work and build and play in a world on an ongoing basis? Well, JB, that's exactly what you tried to do in your DC universe, and it failed. It feels like, when you're talking about a story like this, like you're taking crazy pills. He stood there and said, you know, Hogwarts Legacy was amazing. We're so glad that did well. Suicide Squad did badly, and that just makes us look at the whole environment as a little bit too volatile for our liking. So we're looking at games like Hogwarts Legacy, but asking ourselves, how can we make them more like Suicide Squad?
Yeah, which, as you said, is exactly what they did with their DC IP, and then it didn't work. But the reason it's infuriating to me is because it's like, well, hold on, but you've already got the model to make Hogwarts work. Maybe not as a properly live service game.
You release the best-selling game of the year. Like, take the money and run.
And don't even run. You could do release DLC, release other stuff for Hogwarts Legacy, build a world that people want to return to. So I played Hogwarts Legacy was not even. It was a good game. I really enjoyed it, but it wasn't the best when it came to like narrative or to stuff like that, or even like
Agreed.
The world stuff was fantastic. Thought they did a really good job with Hogsmeade, Hogwarts, all of that sort of stuff. But it wasn't like the greatest implementation of like video game development. But it was a very well made game, and it was really enjoyable, and that's why people I think got on board with it. And you've got so many avenues. Because what we're really talking about is not more people on more platforms. It's they want to monetize people more effectively, and so they think if you're online more, you're going to be spending more money. So I'm like, okay, fine. Like people have been asking about Quidditch coming to Hogwarts. You could have had a DLC for Quidditch, or you could have had another DLC for this. You could have added in some multiplayer elements to Hogwarts. I'm sure people would have really enjoyed that. There are routes to make more money out of these games that have been around for years. But for some reason, rather than go those routes, they're like, no, live service, always on. And it's just like, it's like you don't learn. It's like you don't learn.
And like, it's frustrating for me because I've expressed sentiment in the past, sometimes controversially so, that live service doesn't, they don't have to be dirty words.
No.
And they could be done well, and they could be like there are elements of Helldivers that are live service. Like Arrowhead would describe Helldivers as an always online. You need to be connected to the servers. We all know that firsthand because of what the first week or two of trying to play the game were like. But you look at the ways that they're using the fact that, or justifying the fact that game is always online through this constant push and pull of the the ongoing warfare against the various factions in that game.
Which I love that. I absolutely love that.
Right, exactly. You look at the fact that is a game with a quote-unquote premium currency that can be bought for real-world money and spent but only on cosmetics. And then you also can pair that up with the fact that premium currency can be found in-game. Like you can go into bunkers in the game and find super credits, the things that ostensibly they're selling, which is just almost unheard of in almost any other game of that nature. Like there are ways of tackling some of the live service sort of heebie-jeebies that people have in a way that kind of put people at ease. And one of the things that people always come back to always come back to with Helldivers, for example, is not feeling like they're being nickeled and dimed. We've got the money. We're willing to give it to you, but it's almost like when you're willing to give if you're willing to give someone a handout, you're willing to lend someone some money, you're willing to buy someone a gift. But if someone was constantly pestering you for it, or was you didn't like the way they were going about trying to procure that money from you, you might feel less inclined to give it to them. And games that are always like prodding at you or poking at you and checking your wallets or reminding you of like, hey, you can give me money whenever you want to, right? Sometimes that puts us off. In situations where we wouldn't otherwise be put off, and where there are plenty of gamers out there who are capable or willing to justify additional expenditure and remonetizing on games that they've already paid for, especially, again, when those games aren't full price, which you want to talk about, like what Helldivers 2 looks like in the face of titles like Suicide Squad or Skull and Bones, CEOs trying to justify $70 price tags by calling their games quadruple A, and all of a sudden they're $45 2 weeks later because no one fucking bought it. Like, it just feels like the disconnect between the people calling the shots on game development and the people they're trying to sell these games to I'm not going to say it's never been larger, but some of these comments, they're disconcerting in the sense that it feels you wonder how someone could miss the point that badly. And it's not that I don't understand what he's getting at. Of course, they would love a world where a game sold as many units as Hogwarts Legacy did, and also had the kind of live service hooks in it that Suicide Squad ended up having. But time and time again, the industry seems to be proving the same point, which is it's really hard to have the best of both worlds. And games that are developed around or geared around live service hooks, ultimately that changes the product in a way that pisses people off. Like you look at Suicide Squad, and that was a game with high, levels of visual polish and production values, and some people like the story and the cutscenes were fairly well done, and the moment to moment writing and the voice acting and the elements of the combat were actually kind of like fine, but then you get into the fact that the loot system felt tacked on, and then that is a game that has live service trappings. You look at the fact that the game doesn't really end because it needs to set up an end game, and that end game was underwhelming, and all these things that take the edge off the experience and make it harder and harder to recommend a game like Suicide Squad. And then go back to day one, like server problems, people logging on and completing the game instantly, people logging on 2 hours later and not being able to log on. And again, I'm not giving Helldivers a hall pass and Suicide Squad not a hall pass. It's bad always if you can't play a product you've paid for. But all of those things are problems that have their roots in live service decisions that were made very early on. And I just think that if you took that approach early enough in like a subsequent Hogwarts game, for example, then you're just opening up Pandora's box when it comes to the kind of messes that live service trappings can produce. And that's why I think you can't have your cake and eat it.
I think it's why it's strange, because I would have said there were loads of ways they could have added monetization that wouldn't have felt out of place in Hogwarts Legacy. That would have been fine. Like, for example, the number of cosmetics in that game was like over the top, like too many. If they'd have reined that in to some degree, but given people a way to, use in-game currency bought with potential real currency or a game pass or something, that would, or in a sequel, obviously not in Hogwarts because it wouldn't really work. But there's ways of monetizing it that don't feel filthy, don't put people off. I think like I've had almost the opposite with Helldivers, where I love and respect the way that they're approaching monetization. In some sense, I'd rather they were a little bit more cutthroat and they gave you more access to spend more real money in that game, because I've bought a few things and I have in-game currency that I've found in levels, and I'm like, oh, I've got enough money to buy this and to buy that, and then I can't buy anything else now for another another 24 hours, and then it rolls around to another page of things you can buy, and I'm like, oh, I already have that. Like I can't buy anything. Like I've got, I could spend real money right now, but there's literally been nothing I could spend real money on. I think there's a line between Suicide Squad and Helldivers where most people feel comfortable. And I don't see how that's so difficult to figure out for a company like Warner Brothers. Like you don't need to go, like, especially that's the worst part, is to say, hey, we had a game that did really, really well. It was the best-selling game of last year. Let's decimate it and ruin it as an experience because we want to make more money out of it. Like, oh, come on. It's just It's a little bit soul destroying. And I think at the end of the day, it just says to me that the people that are making the decisions are not people who play games, and they're not listening to people that play games.
I think that is definitely true. What brings me back to the comment I made earlier about like the disconnect between those two groups of people have perhaps never been larger. It also makes you wonder if, like, and again, maybe this is going on sort of behind the scenes and we don't get to see it because it's not the kind of thing you talk about at the Morgan Stanley conference. But it's interesting when, people in senior positions like this, like the CEO of Global Streaming and Games, are being somewhat like retrospective about their own products and their own successes and failures. And you call Harry Potter a success and you acknowledge that Suicide Squad was a failure. And rather than doing the post-mortem on Suicide Squad saying, right, where did we go wrong and how do we work that back up? It's where did we go right with Harry Potter and how can we bring that back down closer to the middle?
How do we monetize Harry Potter? How do we...
Rather than how do we make Suicide Squad a better game or like a better value prospect for consumers, it's how do we make Harry Potter do the heavy lifting that Suicide Squad essentially didn't do? And maybe more conversations like that are happening internally. I'm sure, for example, at Rocksteady, like on the studio side, there are probably a lot of thoughts about how you avoid making another game that goes down the way that Suicide Squad did, because I think the developers and the people with boots on the ground care a lot more about the potential reputational damage a title might do to them going forward. But it is fascinating that that's the perspective. Something succeeded, something failed, but we're going to sweep the failure under the rug and try and utilize the success. Like, I don't know. It makes sense in some respects, but it's frustrating in others.
It's funny because if you imagine like a different industry, right? If you imagine like McDonald's released 2 burgers and one was everyone thought was gross and didn't eat and no one bought, and one everyone bought and it was the best selling new product that you'd released in years, and then you went, oh, okay, going into next year, we're gonna develop the gross burger, and we're gonna double down on gross burger, and we're gonna make crap like the really nice burger more like the gross burger. Everyone would think they were insane. Everyone would say, why? But then it seems like that's what they're doing, and it's just bizarre.
All because technically, when you look into it, they actually earn a higher margin for the gross burger. So, in spite of the fact that the nice burger made them unprecedented amounts of money, they would actually be better off if the gross burger made them that money because the margins are higher. So they made the gross burger more like the nice, they made the nice burger more like the gross burger and swept the gross burger under the rug.
Exactly. It's funny in my mind. It always comes. I always like when I think about how it must be in the boardrooms of these companies. It's this scene from Iron Man with Obadiah saying, Tony Stark did this in a cave, like, you know, screaming at the dude, and but they're talking about Grand Theft Auto 5. They're like Rockstar did this in Scotland in like 2000, and it's just like, how can we not make a game that's as good as GTA 5 with an online presence the same as GTA 5 and make as much money as GTA 5, and no one can, and they just can't figure out the magic formula, and you're like, just make it. They made a really good first person player game, and people loved it so much they didn't want to leave the world, and it was monetizable. How is that hard to put those things together? Like, surely there's a better ways of doing it than what you did with Suicide Squad. There's better ways of doing it than what people have tried with other games like that. You think, like, come on, man, it's not that. It's hard. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's. Surely you know that your game is not the one when you in playtesting and you play Suicide Squad and you go and you put the footage out there before anyone had played Helldivers, before anyone had played Suicide Squad. We had conversations about Helldivers 2 and how good the gameplay looked, and I remember going like, oh my goodness, I really want to play this. It looks amazing. It looks so cool. And then we saw the gameplay from Suicide Squad and we were like, wow, this looks really bad.
Do you remember we sat there for that state of play and watched an extended Suicide Squad gameplay sequence and said, it kind of looks like all four characters are just running around and jumping around with assault rifles and miniguns, shooting purple dots on helicopters.
Yes.
They delayed the game by basically an entire year and released a game where all four characters run and jump around rooftops with assault rifles and miniguns, shooting purple dots on helicopters. I'm sure a lot of work went down in those 12 months. But as soon as they put that game in front of the public, like sometimes the public are right. As soon as they put that original Sonic design from the movies in front of the public were like, "Fucking change it," and they did, and they were right to.
Yeah.
Like, and so I don't know.
Well,
it just sucks because I don't know. Like, I look at the success of something like Hogwarts Legacy, and I see the opposite message, that actually AAA video game development, like premium video game development, isn't that volatile. You just need to make a good game. Like, how many really good games? Ignore studios like Square Enix, who they set their expectations so high that every game Square Enix has ever released has been a failure. But like, how many critically acclaimed games have come out afterwards and be like, "Oh yeah, this was a failure"? It doesn't really happen that much. Like, good.
Not yet.
I'm sure there are underwhelming sales stories out there from critically acclaimed games, but like, there are also a lot of failure stories and games that make studios see the industry or certain spaces in the industry as more and more volatile. Where you could also just point at it and say, like, yeah, you got like a 60 on Metacritic. That's like, of course it looks more volatile. The industry should be volatile for people who make bad games. That's how you stop them coming out.
Yeah, that's such a good point. It's like, it's not actually volatile. What you're really saying is, we tried to make something that people didn't want, because we weren't trying to. Because if you say what was the aim of Suicide Squad, if I had to actually break it down and go, did they make a game that they really wanted people to have a really good time with? I'm like, no. I think they tried to make a game that people would feel like they didn't want to stop playing, so they could make more money out of it.
Yeah, if the free market makes it so that releasing subpar or underwhelming or bad video games is no longer commercially viable, then it's doing its job in a weird roundabout sense. And I know there are probably plenty of high-level people within the video games industry who wish that it was fucking 2003 all over again, where you could go out and license a movie, develop a game you get 20 people to develop a game in 12 months, release it, get a 5 out of 10 from GameSpot, and sell 7 million units. But those days are gone.
Yeah, thank goodness.
Yeah, exactly. With the exception of, I don't know, the Charlie's Angels game, that was pretty rad. The Blade 2 game was up there. The Sopranos game, the Reservoir Dogs game. Any other favorites? Both 50-cent games.
I mean, I bet all these are terrible, and that you just have rose-tinted glasses.
Hey, Jonesy, level with me on this one. The Desperate Housewives game, am I right?
The Desperate, yeah, 100. That was the first quadruple A.
Yeah.
So in chat, which it's the invisible hand of the market rejecting terrible products. Yeah, I completely agree. Rigo. And that's what it should do. Capitalism 101.
That's not volatility. Exactly. That's not volatility.
Make good games.
Like, because you know what else doesn't back up like JB Perrett's claim that the market is volatile is that like you look at like revenue generation across on an industry-wide level, it's not volatile. Has it leveled out in the last couple of years after blowing up massively during COVID in 2020? Like, yes, but it hasn't gone back down the other way. That's why all these companies are still posting profits, and that's why it's still a massive revenue generator. Especially compared to most other forms of media. Yes, things have leveled out. Things aren't growing anymore, and I know that's scary. But we've grown so much to get to this point that it doesn't have to be that scary. But you know what, Jonesy?
Agreed.
There is an out when it comes to bad video games. Video games that, for one reason or another, maybe it was the reviews, maybe it's the word of mouth, you've just decided you don't want to... Actually, no, I'm not going to finish that segue, because that segue endorses piracy, and we're not going to do that on this podcast. What I am going to endorse is the use of emulators to legally play software that you have purchased yourself. That's right, you are dumping your own BIOS from your own console onto an emulator to then play your own personally owned software that you have ripped yourself, because that is the rigmarole that each of us go through to play emulated titles, although there is one platform that it is now significantly harder to do that for. And that, of course, is the Nintendo Switch, Jonesy, because in this past week, Tropic Haze, who created a Switch emulator called Yuzu, have been sued by Nintendo. Basically, Nintendo claimed that Yuzu was, quote unquote, facilitating piracy at a colossal scale. And on Monday, so yesterday at the time of recording, the two parties mutually agreed on a monetary settlement and a permanent injunction. Yuzu is no more. There's another emulator the same company made called Citra that is also no more, effective immediately, and they have parted with $2.4 million that is now lining the pockets of Nintendo.
Lovely.
Although when you look at, although it's worth noting, one, other Nintendo Switch emulators are available. Shout out to Ryujinx. But two, there is some speculation here, as a little bit of an addendum that I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention, that perhaps the creators of Yuzu, Tropic Haze, had flown a little bit too close to the sun. They were monetizing their work with Yuzu in a very noticeable way. They had a Patron, the Patron that was running and generating, I can't even remember what it was, maybe like north of $50,000 a month. They were making big money, and while some of the specifics of what Nintendo claimed that they were doing in terms of bypassing the kind of shit you're not meant to bypass was kind of like iffy or here or there, it was very hard for them to say that they weren't at least one, facilitating piracy in some respect, and two, profiting from it quite largely. But still, though, I don't know, where do you stand on this, Jones? It's such a difficult one, isn't it? Because you don't want to sound like a narc and say, this is Nintendo doing what they've got to do. They've got to go out there and they've got to defend their trademarks and they've got to stop people pirating their games. But at the same time, emulators and emulating video games is not illegal and is an important part of video game preservation. And that's the debate that always raises its head with this.
I'll be a narc. I think that emulation is great, and I'm all for it. I think it's fantastic to give up people access to games that are no longer available, give access to games that maybe you used to play and now that you don't have the system kicking around. Like, I have emulated games in the past. Emulating current systems in order... Let's be honest, like, so if you emulate a game, if you emulate Tears of the Kingdom, which is one of the ones that they've talked about in this, and they said it was pirated over 1 million times. If you're emulating Tears of the Kingdom because you don't want to pay for it because it's like 50 quid and you don't have a Switch, I don't really think you've got a leg to stand on. Not as a user, like I get why people do it as a user, but if you're the company that's facilitating that and you're trying to get rich off of it, I don't really see that as any different to like pirating someone's YouTube content or a movie that they've made or whatever. Like at the end of the day, people need to protect their own intellectual property. And so I totally get it. On the other side of that, like if you're someone who uses an emulator and is playing Tears of the Kingdom, I totally get it. Like someone, not me, but someone very much like me may have done stuff like that in the past when you were in a position where you couldn't financially afford to play certain things. Not me, of course. Another person allegedly similar to me. You know, and I think we've all been there. There's if you're, for example, if you're a student or if you're younger, if you don't have the funds, it sucks so much if you can't see the latest, like play the latest games, do whatever. And so I would understand why people would feel the need to. But when you're monetizing to that degree, like 50,000 a month, and you're literally making money off of another company that have done that, they've put the money in, they've put the effort in. If they never protected themselves like that, they just stopped doing it. They would, at the end of the day, they would just stop because it would be like, what's the point?
So the other Switch emulator out there, which I believe is called Ryujinx, I don't know that much about them compared to Yuzu, but let's say that they are not monetizing, and basically anyway, they're not operating for profit. They have simply made a Nintendo Switch emulator that people could feasibly use legally.
Yeah.
Do you think that, like, you would, if you were Nintendo, you would allow that to, you wouldn't go after that?
So for me, that would then come down to volume. Like I feel like if you are a company, this is the same when it comes to people like copying, taking your YouTube content. If you make YouTube content, if there's someone out there who's small and who's doing it and is providing something to an audience, I don't really have a problem with it. I don't think that if I was Nintendo, I probably wouldn't have a problem with it. I do think there's, when you get to scale, when it actually starts to impact your business, and when someone says, for example, why would I buy it? Like if they said, why would I buy a game when I can just emulate it? Well, there's almost like a flip, which I think you can't risk as a business that happening. So you have to, you basically have no choice. But this is the other thing. If you don't protect your copyright, so if you're a company like Nintendo and you don't protect your own copyright legally, you actually then get into a position whereby you can't enforce your copyright later on because you are effectively giving people the opportunity to copy it in the past. So you have to legally enforce copyright. So
I agree, but I think there's a conversation though to be had about who you go after though. And I think this conversation has happened many times in the past. Agreed. When it comes to, like, Mega Upload was a big one. Yeah. With Kim.com, and of course, like websites like the Pirate Bay and the whole torrent scene. And there are people who look at torrents and the people who, let's say, like BitTorrent, or uTorrent, the companies that make software that allow you to download torrents. They sit there and going, we're not doing anything wrong. And someone might turn around and say, basically every 99.9% of torrents on planet Earth are like copyrighted material and they go, but we don't fuck with them. We make software that lets people do whatever the fuck they want. It's not our fault. Like we developed a kitchen knife. I don't care if someone stabs someone with it. Like and obviously the law has seen that in different ways. And indeed, like, Mega Upload is no more, and Kim.com got his house raided and stuff like that. So clearly it's not as simple as just standing behind I just make the website, bro. I don't. But there is an element of, like, Ryujinx, they just made an emulator. They allowed people to utilize, software or ROMs, or that they could have procured legally using their own purchased copies of the game and running them on other pieces of hardware, again using emulation software that doesn't replicate any of Nintendo's own shit. And the people who Nintendo should be going after are the people who rip a copy of Tears of the Kingdom and put it online, and 100,000 people go and download it. But sometimes it's very hard to go after all those individuals, so they just cut. You cut off the head of a hydra, and two more will grow back in its place. So you just crush the whole thing at once by saying, well, now the emulator doesn't exist. Fuck you. But the emulator wasn't doing anything wrong.
I think for me, if you, so for example, like your kitchen knife example, if you could show me that 90% of kitchen knife, let's be honest, 99.9% of kitchen knives that were made by a company were being used in muggings, I would absolutely advocate for going after the kitchen knife manufacturer.
Sure.
If you can show me that an emulator, like 99.9% of the users are pirating stuff, I think it's fair play to go after the use of the emulator. Like it's similar to like only the people behind like a site like OnlyFans, right? When they started OnlyFans, it wasn't supposed to be a porn site. It was supposed to be for fans of content like Patreon and stuff like that. But because they have no qualms about what content is put on there, it's a porn site. Like for them to turn around and say, "Hey, bro, we're not a porn site. We are we're a appreciation site for online creators." Like, no, come on, man. You're getting a kickback. Like,
you're not wrong. You're not wrong. Sometimes when enough individuals or a significant enough portion of the public move in the same direction, people have no choice but to acknowledge that like sometimes that battle is lost. You see that sometimes with trademarks themselves, where like you have companies like Frisbee is the only one I can think of, where like a brand name or a product name is used to become so synonymous with the product and like so widely used that like you end up losing that trademark because it's just a common term. Like,
there's loads. You know loads of them. I bet you don't even know. Like Hoover for a vacuum cleaner. I believe Americans say Kleenex instead of tissue, don't they? They go, do you want a Kleenex?
Or when there's a high school like era comedy, they've always got Kleenex and lotion next to their bed, which apparently Americans. I grew up believing Americans have to use those two things in tandem every time they want to masturbate. I use neither.
No, they you know why they do though?
Why?
It's because they've all been circumcised. That's why they need the lotion.
Okay, so they need. Okay.
That's what happens in American Pie, isn't it? When he swaps it with the super glue and then he sticks his hand to his dick.
Yeah, a classic scene. One of many.
Yeah.
Not a problem that I have. So,
but no, I think I am all. I like emulators. I like using them to play old stuff. I like that they exist for people to play. Like if you want to play Mario Kart 8 and you don't have £500 and you really want to play Mario Kart, I'm not angry if you want to emulate that. But when a company starts allowing like millions of people to play it via their emulator, it's obvious that Nintendo are going to have to shut you down. And then do you know what? Another thing pops up in its place, but it's so small that people don't kick off at first, and then it survives for a while. Because we've been there, like you talked about BitTorrents and stuff. When I was a kid, it was Napster and LimeWire and all those peer-to-peer sharing stuff. That was pre-torrents, when people were just sharing the actual files and stuff. And I think it just ebbs and flows, and it's a constant it's what it is.
It also becomes more complicated when you're talking about a current gen console and new releases like Tears of the Kingdom. Like I think feelings on piracy always change the older something gets. Like you only have to fucking scroll through TikTok for more than 15 seconds to find someone trying to sell you a device that has 10 different emulators on it for consoles released between 1980 and 1995 that is pre-installed with 12,000 ROMs and it costs $4.99, and people look at that and say, well, that can't be piracy, but it's like, no, well it is, but it's so insignificant you almost can't even bring yourself to think of it as piracy anymore. And so these things will age out, and eventually we will think of Nintendo Switch emulation in the same way we think of like Sega Genesis emulation. It's just like, who cares? That thing, I had an N64 emulator and GoldenEye on a USB flash drive when I was in the equivalent of high school, so 2007. Like it's hard to make it feel like a big deal when it's that easy.
Absolutely, and it's funny, like you say about the emulation machine. Like I've got friends who've got arcade, like proper full-on arcade tower machines with 20,000 games on them from every console you could want, and I absolutely love them. I think they're fantastic because like that's one of the best ways to play those old arcade games that we used to love to play. And there's no way that they've actually fully licensed all of those games. And whenever you talk about like emulation or copyright as well, my mind always goes back to like Ms. Pac-Man, which the reason Ms. Pac-Man exists is because some university students took the board out of a Pac-Man machine, remade a bunch of the stuff, produced their own machine, and then Midway, I think it was, took them to court, and then ended up hiring all of them for a load of money and turned their game into Ms. Pac-Man, and that's why it exists. And I think there's, it doesn't have to be a positive or a negative; it can be a bit of both. And I hope in this case, whilst they've obviously settled for a crap ton of money, that they probably made some hay while the sun shone. Is that the term?
Yeah,
and I'm sure they'll do more in future, and
I'm sure.
And there'll be more emulators that you can play.
Yeah, exactly. And they will continue to live on, and much like, the emulators that are continuing to be worked on to this day, they will continue to find ways to even improve on some of the ways that those original consoles and original sets of hardware played those games. And it's always funny when a product like Metal Gear Solid, the Master Collection Volume 1 releases, and like they do such shoddy jobs of emulating PS1 and PS2 games in that case. And he was like, I can open up my Steam Deck right now, launch OGS2, for example, and using one shortcut, holding down the the start button and pressing up on the D-pad, I can multiply the internal resolution that the game is running at to beyond what it's running at on this PS5 version game that you just released at full price. And it's like, and I don't know. Those are the improvements that I like to see, and that's I don't know. I think the emulation scene is rad.
I think you already made the point as well. Like some people, some emulators, are doing the Lord's work, because if it wasn't for them, Absolutely. There would be games that we wouldn't even be able to play anymore. We'd have no access to them at all. And you wouldn't be able to find a copy anywhere, even if you dug out your old whatever system. You wouldn't be able to play it. So and the companies are like, oh, we don't know where. We were talking about, I can't remember what it was at all, but we were talking about a company before who effectively have lost all of the original code from a game that they made, and I think they were actually asking people online if they had any of the original code for the game so that they could make it available. Like it was. Yeah, like it's and we're now in an era where digital storefronts are getting shut down or being threatened with shutdown semi-regularly, and someone does the maths every time. It's like, oh yeah, if Nintendo closed that, 7,000 games will disappear. Yeah, and it's not advantageous for them to like go through the effort of trying to store them somewhere, make them available in or think about what about in 20 years time if someone wants to do this, and things will just disappear if they're not. And some little guy somewhere at the back of some room is going to go, I've got a hard drive with a bunch of emulators on that you can play all of it. And we'll be like, you are amazing. And we'll all be loving him for all of his games that he's ripped.
Absolutely. Shout out to the little guy at the back of the room. And shout out to you for making it to the end of yet another episode of the SuperShow podcast. Whether you've been watching or whether you've been listening, we thank you for joining us on this. Well, I kind of introduced it as a bit of a downer of an episode, but hopefully we kind of salvaged that a little bit and put a few positive or humorous spins on some situations that could otherwise have been a little bit moody, gloomy. Jonesy, thank you for joining me on this voyage and for offering your spectacular insights and opinions and hot takes and trash opinions and all the rest of it.
Thank you for having me, mate. Always enjoyable.
Man. Always a pleasure, and we will be back here, same place, same time next week for another episode filled to the brim with video gaming goodness. So remember to stay tuned, and we'll see you same time, same place next week. Au revoir, and bon voyage.